Welcome to Systems Philosophy. In previous episodes, we've been looking at culture as a separate information field, something that each individual carries just through learning with their minds, their brains, and therefore, from a real perspective, can't be separated from the individual, just like software can't be separated from the hardware it's stored on. From another framing, culture can be seen as something separate. It persists longer than individual lifetimes. And like the ship of Theseus, you can replace a plank or a sail and the ship still persists. With culture, you can replace individuals through generations, one by one, and the culture still remains intact. The same concept repeated in a different phenomenon. I've spent some time building concepts that culture doesn't require language and have explored language in culture, not language, in animals. And then we have now introduced language and what makes us distinctly human, the differences that culture that carries language between individuals makes, and it makes a lot of difference in terms of abstract thought. Okay. Today I want to look at something called Dunbar's number. This is the number of unique individuals that a person is capable of remembering and interacting with personally, not just a shopkeeper, but shopkeeper Bob or whatever, friends, relatives, acquaintances, people that you know, people whose life and story that you track. So that number is somewhere between 100 and 150. That limits what we call friend. Beyond that, everyone else is stranger. Now, before I go on with human culture, I want to take us back to our nearest genetic relatives, and they are the chimpanzees and the bonobos, but I'll focus on chimpanzees because there's more of them and they've been more studied. So chimpanzees exist as a troop, a group that carries a culture. That group grows if the environment allows, so there's enough food and territory to expand into. And eventually, just like a growing cell, the troop splits. The speculation on my part is that the split is driven by the Dunbar's number, when the ability of individuals to remember who belongs to the group starts to become frayed, less deterministic, so you can't tell friend from foe, us from them, familiar from stranger, then the group dynamics automatically divides. It might be other things. It might be the amount of territory that needs to be covered because the local troop needs to range far further in order to forage from that territory. And so the feeding and landscape limitations mean that the troop size is limited. Whatever causes it, the division at the troop level is similar to the division at the cell level. And once you have a division in the troop, research into primate behaviour shows that primates that used to groom each other can become bitter enemies. This is familiar in human history as well. Brothers fighting on opposite sides of a civil war. cultural divisions where belief systems diverge and whole populations diverge and split around whatever drives wars, ideology, communist versus capitalists, abolitionists versus whatever. I'm not ready to get into war yet. I'm just trying to draw the association. Okay. So primates split based on certain circumstances, but the upper limit seems to be around about Dunbar's number. So even if they live in the Garden of Eden where the fruit falls into their lap, at some stage the ability to maintain who is friend or foe starts to exceed their cognition capability and they split. Now, I'm not saying that Dunbar's number applies to primates, but I think that the concept is continuous through our biology. We recognise friend from foe, and the concept of us and them is pervasive in our culture. All right. So I've set up a sort of budding multiplication system where troops of primates or packs of wolves can bud off. So for a wolf pack, it might be a breeding pair that starts a new pack, or it might be that the large pack splits. There's different ways for the pack to multiply and grow, but it can't grow beyond a certain base size without running into the limits that I've been talking about. With humans, language and culture, we get a dynamic that is fundamentally different to the direct experiential culture of the non-verbal primate. We can carry stories about how our cousins or ancestors split off and became tribe A, B, and C. We can stretch Dunbar's number to perhaps individuals within the tribe that are friendly and by association continue to trade and interact with other tribes. From this, I propose, and this is philosophy, not fact, that early humans remained tribal like our primate ancestors, limited by the same environmental factors and even the ability to distinguish friend from foe. But the fact that a tribe that splits then shares a culture and a language, and the fact that we can abstract and remember, pass stories from generation to generation about the fact that our ancestors are this other tribe. The culture can therefore bridge the limit that population and landscape impose on cohesive culture. This makes a fundamental difference. One of the things that culture does is it, as an information field, has a certain capacity of storage. The storage is the collective memory of all the individuals within the group that holds the culture, with redundancy built in. Because if every group held a unique aspect of the culture, which is the ultimate extreme of storage capacity in terms of individual minds, then losing one of those individuals means you lose that information, those hard-learned lessons that have been carefully repeated over generations. Therefore, whatever the storage capacity is, it is somewhat less than the total of the individuals. It also speaks to forms of specialization for the knowledge. We have a clear physical difference between human males and human females, and ancestral roles, where the males were traditionally warriors, hunters, and protectors, and the females were traditionally foragers, preparers of meals, I suppose, and raisers of young children. Children were often raised to a certain age by the mothers and then handed off to the men once they passed some sort of rite of passage in a traditional tribal society. So there's a clear delineation of the sexes. That way, the culture allows itself to build specialties. You can have knowledge keepers that become specialized. Females, for instance, in many cultures, kept genealogies and even practiced a sort of taboo around who can reproduce with who to prevent inbreeding. Warriors would maintain the knowledge of how to hunt, the knowledge of the greater landscape, the knowledge of making and using weapons. We have the cultural field now bleeding into the technological field. Cooking and preparing certain plants becoming held within the culture of the women, and harvesting and preparing the materials for certain weapons being held within the culture of the men. Technology itself is a sort of separate information field. I have already given in previous episodes the example of the hermit crab that uses non-biological means to augment its biological capability. So culture is not required for utilization of environmental resources. It, however, allows flexibility and adaptation beyond what biological genetics can carry. Genetics has burrows, making of hives, digging of ant nests, and making of bird nests. So biological interaction with the environment that uses things that are not of the biochemistry, things that are not of the self, like culture, extends back beyond people. What people have is we have the ability to augment our biology in more flexible means. By being able to throw, we've been able to throw stones and spears. By being able to manipulate and pound, we have been able to crack nuts and bones, eventually figuring out that using stones can cause sharp shards to be formed, and so we get cutting edges that allow us to shape hides, scrape them into furs and ultimately clothing. We can take the basic primate technology of using long sticks or pieces of grass to fish for termites and ants as a food source, and bundle them together into twine to make rope. We can therefore combine and invent. So the throwing stick gets combined with the sharpened edge, and we generate spears with sharp points and arrows with sharp points and fletching and bows. All of this knowledge is not carried by the individual. The invention need only happen once, and then it can be taught. Even if the invention is forgotten, finding an artifact can reconstruct part of the knowledge. So somebody that is familiar with flint knapping into making spear points might find a novel flint from a different tribe or a different time, be able to, through their own artisan knowledge, reconstruct the process to make that flint into that spearhead. This is the way that the physical environment can store knowledge. We're used to that in glyphs carved on stone or ink printed on paper or written on papyrus. But the preservation of technological knowledge goes right back into the earliest examples of spears. One of the challenges that the cultural information field has is that the limit of Dunbar's number limits the storage capacity. Therefore, it limits the culture. If tribes cooperate and trade, we may find that tribes can, like a relay race, share access to specific resources. And here I'm thinking of the Australian Aborigines swapping seashells with ochre, and that trade taking place over hundreds and thousands of kilometres. We can still have tribal held territory, but all we need is for cooperative relationships between tribes where everybody respects each other's boundaries. We have cultural stories that remember who's who and pass on the knowledge of how to interact, and even traditions, ceremonies that carefully test whether or not a neighbouring tribe has turned hostile. Because even if you were friends, it is possible that situations change and friends become enemies. That is common throughout the human history and the history that we have documented, and there is no reason to doubt that friendly tribes suddenly turn on each other. Perhaps we have a resource, a famine, and therefore, or one tribe's population has grown beyond their bounds, and therefore they need, what was the famous term, Lebensraum, room to live, more territory to expand into. So there's many reasons why tribes can be either friend or foe and easily switch those roles. Anyway, I think I have covered a fairly significant enhancement to the cultural story that I'm telling. So culture is a memory field. That memory field carries information and acts in many ways like a new entity. The natural boundary of the entity has been the troop or the pack. be it wolves, orca, or baboons. When that entity splits, the culture is inherited, but like a species gene pool, it is likely to drift and adapt under the rules of dynamic equilibrium. Thanks to language and the enhanced cognition that language has given humanity, we are able to keep stories of history, remember, to reconstruct things from the past and bring them into the present situation, beyond any lifetime experience and beyond the simple behaviours that pantomime without language can transmit. Culture, therefore, overlaps the tribal boundaries in terms of modular storage, and like cells maintain the form of an organism, different individuals being born into a culture pick up and carry that culture into the next generation. So culture becomes immortal to the death of individuals, just like a multicellular organism becomes immortal to the death of individual cells. The information field that maintains the dynamic equilibrium of the organism is similar to the information field that maintains the dynamic equilibrium of the culture. Through language, the boundaries of Dunbar's number, the limits to what can constitute a single cooperating group of individuals expands. With chimpanzees, we have recorded that once the troop splits, then we have two separate entities that are us and them. They no longer remember the friendships. They may maintain tribal boundaries, but they may just as easily go to full-on war. With humans, there's no reason to believe that that was the fundamental unit of cooperation. Yet language and our modern history, where we have nations, towns and cities far beyond Dunbar's number, the philosophical speculation is that language and the commonality of culture allowed us to bridge the difference between the troop, us and them, to maintain through cultural memory and perhaps even common belief systems like gods and religions, a shared purpose to see others as still brothers, even though the tribes have separated generations ago, millennia ago, even in the terms of even what's current now. That's a good place to stop. This has been another episode of Systems Philosophy.